There we go.
There.
Okay. We will bring this meeting to order. It is Wednesday, October 17th at 6 p.m. We are in the Carson City Community Center Sierra Room at 851 East William Street, Carson City, Nevada. Madam Secretary, will you call the roll?
Chairperson Law,
Here.
Vice Chair Val, Member Barrett,
Here.
Member Golden,
Here.
Member Harris,
Here.
Member Harvey.
Member Harvey?
He's here, I know.
Okay.
Member Rogers.
Here.
A quorum's present.
All right, if you will rise with me, we'll proceed with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Item C, approval of the minutes of the past meeting of the Airport Authority. I assume everybody's had the opportunity to look through them. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the September meeting.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Member Rogers, seconded by Member Barrett. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye.
I abstain.
Aye.
Okay. We have an abstention.
I wasn't here, so my apologies.
That's okay. Mr. Golden. All opposed say nay. None heard. Motion carries. Modification of the agenda. The chairman reserves the right to modify the agenda in order to most effectively process the agenda items. Items may be taken out of order. Items may be combined for consideration by the authority. Items may be pulled or removed from the agenda at any time. Does any member have a request to pull or reorder any of the items? None seen, we will move forward. Item E, public comments. Members of the public who wish to address the Airport Authority may speak on agendized and non-agendized matters related to the airport. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person or topic. If your item requires extended discussion, please request the chairman to calendar the matter for a future Airport Authority meeting. Do we have any public comment at this time? Please come forward. And please state your...
Sorry, I don't have a sign-in sheet.
That's okay. State your name, spell your name,
Okay.
and proceed. Thank you.
My name is Tom Harris, T-O-M-H-A-R-R-I-S. I'm a professor in economics at the University of Nevada, Reno, and director of the University Center for Economic Development, as well as a state extension on rural development. What I was going to do real quickly, we have a longer one later. Ken called me a couple of months ago about doing an economic impact of the Carson City Airport on Carson City economy. What I've given you is just the executive summary, which I'll go through very quickly. The one thing that is missing is some economic impacts of construction, which is on the airport, which we'll be adding to this week, and hopefully we'll have a finished copy in a couple of weeks. The Carson City Airport, like I said, it's in the Carson City area. It's currently the 5th overall busiest airport in the state, and it's the 3rd busiest general aviation airport in Nevada. What we try to do is many factors go into economic development, and airports are an important part, especially with the new economy, not only for residents but also for visitors who want to come here. It's important for economic development because industries are just-in-time inventory, these kinds of things, and it's also for economic development. All of you have heard of drones. I don't know how that's going to be maintained. I don't know how in the world that's going to be, but I bet you airports are going to have to play an important because you can't have things flying around like mosquitoes. I come from Texas, so but anyway, we it's going to be an important part, and even for this area, because of the growth of the Tahoe Regional Industrial Center and push out of Reno, push out of other things, that's going to impact the Carson City Airport. Now, what we did, just real quickly, we end up using what we call an input-output model, which derives the economic linkages between economic sectors, such as the Carson City Airport. And what kind of linkages does Carson City Airport have? Its own expenditures, what's happening locally, those expenditures, and also people who work for the airport, they have expenditures, but those circulate within the economy, and you have total economic impacts. The other thing it's going to have is the construction, which I don't have here. What are the construction impacts? When you go and build something here, they also have an impact that ripple through the economy. You also have industries that are related to the airport. Those, because of the airport, they are there. And so they have people, and you'll see the numbers. And lastly, we did a quick little thing on that of people flying in general aviation, visitors who come to the area, and what their economic impacts are. So in total, in summation, it's about a almost a $26 million direct economic impact here, 100 given all the other factors, and that's even going to be more with construction, with a total economic impact of about $36 million. And the impacts just go beyond just from the businesses here locally, but also not just from the airport, but other businesses outside that are related. And I think that people need to be aware that it's a very big, I always say shiny objects people always look at. The airport is a very unique situation for economic development. If you don't have one, it retards your ability, especially in this new economy. And on the last page, I have local business and growth. It's something I have in the text I found that was something the U.S. Department talks about, that civilian airports give the local businesses innovation and create new jobs, which new people who come to the area want to fly out, of course, and it gives other economic activities, which we don't even know of. Like I said, with the drones and other things, we have these other things that are going to come about. In the state of Washington, they did very good. They looked at the whole state, and one of the network of airports extends to commerce and economic development throughout the state. And individual airports that may be small, especially rural, throughout, but they extend the commerce to these rural areas, and even rural in Carson City. Lastly, imports are economic conditions because they increase the value of the output, employment, and labor. And the mere existence of an airport is very, very important to local people to know they have air services. And if you're going to recruit businesses, they need to know they can have an airport because, quite frankly, we are the state capital. That's very unique. People can fly into Reno, but sometimes people also have time, having the ability to fly in. The Carson gives people, and businessmen are very busy. If they have to conduct business in the state government, they can do it and get out and do things efficiently. And there's, like I said, there's other things we do not know that the airport will be playing more in this new economy. So just to wrap it up in 3 minutes is that we finally had significant impacts. We need to include the construction, but the Carson City Airport, yes, you have Las Vegas, yes, you have Reno, but you have areas like Carson City, North Las Vegas Airport. These airports are very vital to local economies, and if you don't have them, it retards sometimes the different types of businesses people can look at. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer. Hope I did already. Ken, if anything you want to add, yes, sir.
Mr. Golden.
As this is not an agendized item,
No.
we really can't have a discussion with you.
Okay.
This comment is directed towards Ken Moen. Can you please get this gentleman back at a subsequent date so that we can agendize this item and have a discussion?
Absolutely. Our intent was to be able to give the board an update where this item was at in its progress. Mr. Harris just provided this update to me this week, so I thought it would be important to bring him before the board to give him a high-level overview, and then we'll be able to bring back it probably won't be until after the first of the year because of the holidays and whatnot, but that way we can give a little deeper dive into the material.
Since there wasn't a sign-up sheet, I will respectfully request one of two things. Either stick around so we can talk after the meeting, or if you could provide us with your business card.
I have his contact information. I'll provide it to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Walk around the university, you'll find it.
I'm paying the university. Second go around, son's getting an MBA. So,
I'm in the business.
I know you are. And he got his undergrad through you, so business also.
Any further questions of Mr. Harris?
Not for Mr. Harris, but again, a comment.
Mr. Barrett?
For our manager, Mr. Moen. And I would encourage you to think about putting this on the Board of Supervisors agenda after the first of the year and coming to us as well with Mr. Harris.
Absolutely. Our intent is to distribute this information wide and far once we get the completed report.
Yeah, after the construction stuff, yes, great.
Any other questions of Mr. Harris or Mr. Moen at this time? None heard. Thank you, Mr. Harris. Appreciate you being here. Any further public comment at this time? None heard. We will move on. Item F, there is no activity in that item, so we will move to item G. For possible action, approval of the annual audit report of the Carson City Airport. Ms. Cohn.
Thank you. For the record, Beth Cohn Cole with Cohn & Company CPAs. I believe you have a copy of the audit and a two-page letter. The letter is just required board communication, and it has no findings or issues in that letter. It's just an FYI letter. The financial statements are the first report after the table of contents, and the bound financial is our audit opinion. Our audit opinion was unmodified, which is what you want to see as board members. I want to review your budget to actual. There's a lot of information in here, but I'm going to review the budget to actual, which is on page 22. You had total revenue that was budgeted with your final budget of approximately $1,037,000. Your actual revenue was about $880,000, and your variance, you were under budget primarily due, and significantly due to the FAA grant revenue that ended up coming in less, but then you expended less. So your operating expenses on the bottom of page 22 were almost $10,000 under budget. On page 23, it represents your administration, your salaries and benefits, and they were approximately $29,000 under budget. And then your capital outlay, which directly relates to your FAA grant revenue, was about $230,000 under budget. So you had an excess of revenue over expenses of approximately $271,000. We did also do a report in accordance with government auditing standards, and we noted no findings in connection with that report either. I think that's it. Do you want to look at the balance sheet too, maybe? Let's look at that too. That's on page 7. And I'll look at the first column, which is your general fund, because the last column is the government-wide, which includes PERS liability, but you budget based on the fund basis, and that's the first column. So you have total assets of approximately $1,200,000, of which $877,000 was cash, and the rest related to receivables, which you receive for your property taxes in July and August of 2018. Of that $877,000 of cash, you have committed approximately $22,000 for gate fees. But a very clean audit. Everything went really well. A little challenging for Ken this year, because there were a lot of different people with their hands in the pot and trying to find everything, but we did end up finding everything.
Any questions of Ms. Cohn? Any public comment on this item? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Mr. Rogers.
I am thrilled, and I'd like to comment publicly on the existence of the interest line item in the income, on the revenue side of the equation. I'd like to thank our chairperson for making that be possible. That's not a small feat, and it was certainly necessary, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion that we approve the annual audit report for fiscal year 2017-18 as presented. Do I have a motion?
I move.
Mr. Harris has moved.
Second.
Mr. Barrett has seconded. Any discussion on the motion? None heard? No public comment? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Larry?
Aye.
Okay. And so you're voting in favor of acceptance, to make that clear?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
I am. Thank you very much. I'm voting in favor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Motion passes. Okay, moving on to item G2, for possible action, approval of the Cinderlight Extension Agreement to continue as the operator for the mining and sales of CCAA surplus rock and aggregate. Mr. Moen.
Thank you, Chair Law. As you know, we discussed the agreement with Cinderlight the extension agreement was expiring this year. And so Chair Law and I met with Cinderlight earlier in the year to discuss the extension. And the big issue for us going forward was that the royalty had not been adjusted since the inception, like 2012. So our contention with Cinderlight was we're very happy to have them as a partner in this project, and that we'd like to continue that partnership. However, we wanted to adjust it to current CPI. And so it's just under a 10% adjustment to bring it to today's dollars. So the royalty will increase from $1.52 to $1.67 a ton. And then our other piece of information is that we're going to reset that every year on the anniversary date of November 1 going forward for the next 3 years. So Cinderlight was content with that, and so with the board's approval, we request a motion to approve the draft extension agreement that you have in front of you. And that new royalty fee will go into effect on November 1st of 2018.
Any questions of Mr. Moen? Any question, Mr. Golden?
Okay. I respect what yourself and Chairperson Law did, meeting with them, getting an accelerated payment, if you will, or an increased payment for the tonnage. Just kind of curious, where does that dollar amount factor in with the marketplace for aggregate at this time?
Well, I did some research on that, and I brought out a couple of specialists in the field, and one of them that was particularly helpful was Joy Engineering. They're based out of Susanville.
Sure.
They have a big plant out in Trick that they're doing work on, and he informed me that Trick does not pay them. They don't pay a royalty to Trick at all. They basically do it as they look at it as a way to clean up their rock out at that facility. So he says, in his opinion, that we were very fortunate to have a partner like Cinderlight in that project. He said, if we went out to bid on that, he says, probably the only way that you would get a better rate, even with the improved economy, is if you ran that rock pile yourself. And obviously, we're not going to do that. So
You're right.
Yeah.
Understood. I'm just, like I said, I'm just curious. I know Tykert in particular is running out of rock in a lot of different places, so.
Well, the information that Cinderlight provided us was they believe there's another 3 to 5 years in that facility.
Okay.
Yep.
I just wanted to add to that. When we originally realized we had the rock out there and wanted to clean it up, the original approach from our earlier engineering advice was to get an FAA grant to pay to clean it all up. But thankfully, we had some very good airport tenants, including Mr. Leach, Eric Leach,
Right.
who said, you guys are crazy, this is worth money, do something. And thankfully, he persisted, and the authority, got on board, and we were able to get this deal with Cinderlight. So it's been, as you know from looking at the financials, it's been a really good thing for us. So.
The other thing that I would add to that is when we had our meeting with Cinderlight, they were saying that the market for rock, when we started this program, was significant because there were people all over the place building rock walls and so forth. And one of the reasons that our sales levels have diminished somewhat is because the Baselite has come out with their interlocking rock CPU items, and that has eliminated a lot of that. But they still seem to have a market for our material and think that they will into the future. So I think it's a good deal for us.
Okay.
Any further questions? Hearing none, any public comment on this? Mr. Leach, please come forward, state your name, spell your name, and proceed.
Eric Leach, Laetsch. Mr. Dacus, thank you for those kind words. Madam Chairman, as Mr. Dacus explained, I've been fundamentally involved in what I refer to as the East End project, which includes the rock, since 2011. At one time, there was a working group that was short-lived. And I was very involved in that. I realize generally there's a 3-minute limitation. I'm willing to try to stay within that, but I suggest that because of the subject and because of the background that I have, I'd like to try to do a little more thorough job in what I want to present to you.
Try to be as succinct as possible.
We all know I don't do succinct well, but I will try. That was left out of my DNA, folks. I'm sorry. I'm here to ask you to continue and not act on this matter at this meeting. In order to give yourselves, perhaps a small group of you working with the manager, probably working with Cinderlight, an opportunity to take a fresher look at what I believe to be a catastrophe waiting to happen. I mentioned to one of the airport people today that I was going to come to this meeting, and I haven't been here for a while, to talk about the Iraq issue. And he said, "Oh, you mean the pilot killer?" And do you recognize the term, Mr. Golden?
Oh, yeah.
I want to be as clear as I can that I put absolutely no fault whatsoever on Cinderlight for the situation we have. It's not Cinderlight's responsibility to manage the rock project for the benefit of the airport, and it's certainly not their responsibility to manage the rock project for the safety of the people that use this airport. But what we have out there is a tragedy. It is unfortunately an example of incredible mismanagement on the part of prior airport manager and prior airport authority that you are now stuck with. None of you were part of that decision, and certainly our manager was not part of that decision. But I ask you a rhetorical question. If you were asked to approve leaving a very large pile of rock at the clearance end of a runway of the state capital airport at the end of a construction project, instead of clearing that rock away Would you approve that? If you then, after the rock was left there, and you were the person responsible for deciding what to do with it, recognizing that perhaps the most important responsibility that the manager and the authority have are safety at the airport. If you were in charge, if it was your decision, would you not require that the rock removal process be done in a way that, number one, emphasized safety? Instead, the rock project has been managed for the benefit of Cinder Lights to be efficient for Cinder Light, which is absolutely their right. And as a result, in what is supposed to be the airport clear zone, we have stockpiles of rock. And I don't believe there's being paid for having stockpiles of rock, but that's a separate issue. That's incidental. We have a quarry face in line with the runway runoff. If we have somebody lose an engine on short final, where do they go? They're faced with, which pile of rock do I hit? Do I hit the quarry face, or do I try to only kill myself and my passengers and try not to kill the person in the excavator that's working there?
Understand. And I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up. We've gone twice the limit now. Please.
I have a little more to say. I'd like to say it. I will, of course, accede to your request. But do you think that I'm providing anything useful, based on my background?
I do. And I think we all know where you're headed, and I understand the concern.
May I go on to where I was headed?
If you can wrap it up in a minute and a half.
What I would recommend is that a project which was originally contracted to be a 3-year project and was then extended to be a 6-year project, in which virtually nothing was done as a market study, and which suggestions to consider alternative ways of managing this asset were ignored. You now have an opportunity to take a semi-fresh look at this. It would seem to me that you have the bargaining power, whether it be with the present contract, which is coming to an end, or someone new, to put a priority on cleaning up the unsafe mess that's out there at the end of our runway. This is supposed to be an airport. That clear zone should be safe. Some of you may know the name Ted Contry. For those of you who don't, Ted Contry was a major contributor at this airport. Passed away about 2 years ago. Mr. Contry was a owner of a substantial earth-moving business. He also owned or operated at least one quarry. Very familiar with the situation we had here. Many of my ideas came from Mr. Contry. They're not original to me. Had this been up to Mr. Contry, whose ideas were rejected, what would have been done is, the first thing is that the pile of fines that is on the south side of the hill that have been sitting there for 8 years would have been brought up and used to fill the moonscape.
I'm going to have to ask you to finish with your comment.
I'm through.
Thank you. Any questions?
I have a question for Mr. Leach, actually, if that's all right.
Go ahead, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Leach, my question to you is, do you think that the
quarry operation can be continued with changes to operations in a way that it would be safe? Or is this just something it's time to close this out and get the quarry closed, get things straightened out, get it cleaned up, get it safe? I mean, is there a way to continue the quarry operation and do it safely?
I believe that's a very, very significant question. Thank you. There's no doubt in my mind that the rock that is out there in the existing contract zone and rock that's out there that's outside of the contract zone can be harvested for the benefit of the airport. The question is how to do it. In order to do it, I think what we have to do is to invest some effort to get a clear zone that is safe. Fill up what I call the moon field, get the excavation off the face, and get the work off to the side. Whether it's economically possible to move the stockpiles, I don't know, but this is the sort of thing that should be done. I absolutely believe it can be done economically. I believe it's good for the airport. I think it'd go on for many, many years. I think a long-term plan should be established. But number one, the focus should be not just on a cost change, but on what can be done to make it safer.
Thank you.
I would thank you for the opportunity. I'd welcome any other questions.
Thank you. And I think that we would be better off personally, after talking to the two excavation contractors I've spoken with, including Cinderlight, is to work with them and develop that project rather than go out to bid and find other people who are willing to come in, because I don't know that we have that option at this point. I truly don't. I think that we need to work with who we have in order to get a systematic recovery of that area. And they indicated to us when we were talking to them that they are going to begin that process, and I'd like Mr. Moen to comment on that. Is that not the understanding that you had?
I sent out a photo probably 2 weeks ago to the members of the authority that showed the rehabilitation beginning on the north side of that slope. To the best of my knowledge, there's nothing out there on the design standard of the airport that violates on the FAA side. That area, the airport's been inspected by NDOT as well as the FAA, and I believe we're in the design guidance. Just for sake of comment, obviously, if you looked at other airports around the country and the world, there are airports that are built on the edge of cliffs. There are airports built on water. You can find those examples all over the place. But as a pilot inbound, and you're concerned about that, you should probably be carrying a little extra altitude and a little extra speed and prevent an issue like Mr. Leach is describing. But if you're coming in low and you're planning to hit the numbers, then and you lose the engine short final, that's obviously not a good decision. But go ahead.
I don't see that as any different than approaching St. George, Utah. Mr. Golden.
I see two different issues here. There's a safety issue involved that it's been brought to this authority's attention before. This is not the first time this item has come up on a safety issue. And then there's the economic business issue of Cinderlight's contract. I see no need to enter into the contract with them at this time because we should address the safety issue. Mr. Leach, with all due respect, though, you know what? You probably shouldn't fly into Truckee because, you see, Tykert has a mine on short final to runway 20 there, and when the runway was built, which is the crosswind runway, and the prevailing wind there comes out of the south, it's runway 20, there's a big cliff, a big face, just like what we have here. In my opinion, that's the danger, is that we've created this rock escarpment or rock face that was not there before. It would be nice if we had a nice wide field like Minden does. We don't. It's unfortunate. The excavation and rock quarry operation has made that worse. That said, if we hadn't quarried the rock, what would it look like today? I don't, it's not going to be a whole lot different, and I don't wish anyone to have an engine failure on short final. But one of the things we do when we land runway 20 in Truckee is we look at the VASI and say the hell with it, and we land further down the runway, just because we know that there's going to be wind shear when the wind is blowing from that wind going right down the cliff. And that's what happens here. We've heard that before from other, participants in our meetings, that they had the concern of wind shear. The quarry operation is likely making it worse, and quite candidly, I am not thrilled landing with my nose of my aircraft pointing at excavating equipment as I'm coming in, like I did this morning. It doesn't do a whole lot to instill confidence as I'm coming in and I'm staring at a giant excavator right in front of me. This might be the opportunity to address these issues with Cinderlight at this time, since their agreement is up.
Yeah.
Mr. Harris.
Let me add on to that is that this is the time, before signature rather than after, so.
Mr. Barrett.
I understand and have been told many times since I was in the questioning business as a newspaper man, there is no such thing as a stupid question, but this will probably be close enough to that. My question is out of ignorance, not having been a pilot or flown into anything except with some other pilot up there and me sitting in the back. My question is there a way to get that out? And was this discussed with them in terms of, well, rather than increasing the amount, could you do something about that and we'll leave the amount? You and Mr. Moen discussed all this with them or not?
Mr. Moen, go ahead.
The extension agreement doesn't talk about their day-to-day activity. It's merely about the time frame and the royalty. We have always had the ability to discuss how they operate and remove rock and when they rehabilitate. The excavator doesn't stick up past the ground level at the end of the airport. It's not like it's a crane that sticks up above the natural surface. I think right now there's a flag on the end of the one excavator when it's working closest to it. Certainly we can discuss how they rehabilitate, but once that slope has been rehabilitated, the contract specifies it goes to a 3-to-1 slope. So that drop-off is still going to be there. That you have the same drop-off as Stead landing runway 32.
Right, exactly.
I mean, these are not unusual occurrences. All we're saying is that there's stockpiles out there, and to Mr. Leach's point, it's not a clear area to land emergency landing. Well, Gonai Road at the end of 9 is an obstacle. The terrain rises on the other side of Gonai, and that's an obstacle. I mean, if you're going to lose an engine on departure or short final out there, you're not going to land in a flat field either. But we always have the opportunity to discuss with Cinderlight, and they're a very willing partner on how they modify that, and they've been very amenable to correcting items as we see fit, like we asked them to put flags on their equipment out there at the end of the runway. So I see these two issues, as Mr. Golden does, they're exclusive. One is the payment royalty issue. The other is if we see a safety issue, then yes, we're going to identify it and rectify it. So, but that being said, we're in compliance with regulations. If we believe we need to take another look at that, make sure that we are, I'm absolutely all open for that.
Another semi-stupid question. Does the FAA have any dog in this hunt besides what you just said, that we're in compliance?
There's design standards for all that sort of stuff. How the distances based upon the type, the category aircraft, all those things come into play when the airport's designed and laid out. And we're not out of compliance. Now, if we had a 300-foot crane off the end of the runway, then obviously that's a obstruction. So there's different pieces to that. So we can certainly look at that. We do have our proposed engineering consultant in the audience tonight, so this is something that we can talk about with them as well. But I see these as two separate issues at this point in time.
Final question that's not so stupid. Is there any problem with delay?
Pardon me?
I say a final question that's not so stupid. Is there any problem with delaying action on this item and doing what you just said?
Well, I think that the airport's due an additional royalty. I don't think that's going to exclude us from discussing the operation of the quarry. I think this is really about Cinder Lite continuing as our vendor or our operator out there, also as well as catching up what the airports do and as far as revenue is concerned. But the operation of that quarry has always been on the table for the airport to work with the vendor as far as improving operations and changing. For example, the approach to Arrowhead Drive that the board just approved, that changed the whole dynamic of how they access the facility from, as opposed to being on Bowers Lane, which is due south of the airport, due east of the airport, and then the approach now is on the north side of Arrowhead. So they're very amenable to those kind of discussions.
Well, let me get back to my semi-stupidity. I don't quite understand. Cinder Light's in the business to make money. Would it change their attitude at all to say negotiating the cost to you and the way you do it? You say they're not related. I'm not sure I see it that way, but I can be enlightened.
Well, the reason I say they're not related, or they're not related, is that if we go out to Cinder Light, and let's say we discuss with them that, hey, you can only do certain work at certain times out there. Let's say it's after dark, for example. I'm just throwing that out as a hypothetical. I'm not proposing that that's what they do. But my point is that they're willing to modify how they proceed in there. All this agreement says that they're going to continue to be our vendor for 3 years and that we're going to get an increased royalty. It's not saying how they function in that area. What the long-term contract specifies is how that area is rehabilitated once they're complete. Now, if the board says, hey, what we want to really do is just to haul all that stuff off-site, rehabilitate the hill per the contract, and then do all their crushing or loading or whatever in another location, sure, that's going to change their cost benefit, no doubt about it. But is that what we think is the best move right now? I'm not prepared to make that suggestion to the board to say that's the best thing.
Mr. Harris and then Mr. Golden.
Actually, I've got two questions, but I'm willing to take turns. But my first question is just to repeat John's, and that is, John Barrett's, and that is there an issue with delay? And we got a lot of explanation as to why we shouldn't worry about this, but what I didn't hear was a yes or no as to whether waiting 30 days to look at this further is an issue.
What are we asking to look at further at? Whether we extend the agreement and the royalty we receive, or are we asking them to reanalyze what their operation is? That's the question I'm wondering right now.
And let me comment. You are exactly right when you say we don't know what to ask. I mean, I'll put it this way: we don't know what to ask for, but we can't know what to ask for right now, and we need to look at it. And I think Member Golden made a very good point that if we want to have any leverage around this, it's good to talk before the signatures fall on the page. That's it. So again, the question is there an issue with waiting 30 days and spending more time looking at it?
Before we answer that, shall we finish with the comment from Mr. Golden and then maybe address all the issues at one time? Mr. Golden.
One comment, one question. I think the question will help clarify this whole discussion, which has really just gotten way out of hand. Comment being is, when this is restored to a 3-to-1 grade, it ain't going to make any difference if you hit the rocks or hit the grade. You're okay. There isn't going to be any difference whatsoever. Okay, the grade on the approach runway 20 in Truckee, I'll never forget driving down Glenshire Drive one day in the morning, looking up, and I see this big white X out there, and I thought, what's that? Well, it was an airplane that didn't quite make the runway and went right in. And you're not going to change this approach to the runway because the geography drops out there, no matter what.
Significantly.
No matter what. So the question is it going to be dirt or is it going to be rock over a intermediary period? But here's the question that I need answered to help me understand exactly what's going on here. Ken, with all due respect, I'm hearing from you that this is solely about the royalty and not about the way they operate. So, Steve, do we have two separate agreements with Cinderlight? Do we have one that outlines the royalty and one that outlines their operations with us? Because it sounds to me like that's what's going on. If this is strictly an issue about the royalty we receive and that we have a separate operating agreement with them, I'm confident in renewing this agreement and taking the increased royalty. If there's only one agreement, then that's a horse of a different color.
Mr. Takis. Oh, Mr. Rogers?
If you don't mind. I don't care whether there's one or two agreements. I want somebody to show me the clause in there that says we get to tell them how to operate if there's a safety issue involved. And if that's shown to me, that there's a clause somewhere in either in an agreement we have with Cinderlight where we have that authority to specify to them how they operate based on the basis of maintaining the safety of the airport. We can sign an agreement if it changes the royalty, but that clause is still in there, we're good to go. But I don't believe I've seen that one yet. And without that, I think we have a liability. But then I also think it's completely relevant if Mr. Moen says, look, we're in compliance with all the FAA requirements for what a clear zone has to look like, then I think that's very relevant. I think that, I think we need to get back down to contractual obligations. To the FAA, do we have any obligation to modify the shape of that area of the off the runway? That's question one. Second question is, if we decide that that's necessary in accordance with FAA requirements, do we have the contractual authority to specify that to our vendor?
Mr. Takis.
Okay, so let me see if I can answer the questions. Okay. First question is, I think Mr. Barrett asked the question, so is there a time issue here in terms of when you act? The current agreement expires on November 15th of 2018. And so if you continued this until next meeting is the 21st. It's after the 15th. So there is that issue. Whether or not that's a deal killer or not, I don't know. My expectation is if we talk to Cinderlight, they may not care if the issue came up on the 21st instead of the 15th. But that's the direct answer to your question. That there is, at least on paper, there is a time issue. The second question, or I'm going to go in the order I remember them, but is Mr. Golden's question, which is, do we have more than one agreement? No, we have one agreement, and we've got had one extension to that agreement, and this would be a second extension to the agreement. The agreement was entered into in 2011. And it does give some latitude to the airport manager on operational stuff, but it doesn't have a sentence that says the airport manager can direct how the operation occurs, which is kind of, I think, the more direct question you asked. Instead, actually, this is Mr. Rogers' question. Instead, for material removal locations, stockpile areas, access points, and anything that would tend to interrupt airport operations, it defers to the airport manager. So if it falls in those categories, there is the airport manager discussion. We are in a position basically to dictate it. But I don't know enough about what the proposed solution is to know whether that would fit within one of those categories. I'm the same as the rest of you guys. When I fly in, I see that equipment, and that adds an additional little adrenaline rush because you're thinking, man, I sure don't want to hit that stuff. But, I also don't want to land short.
It's also a distraction, without question.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
It is a little bit.
When you see that excavator moving,
Yeah.
okay, and you're landing, it's
Yeah.
like, okay. But, as Linda pointed out, there are other airports where there's all sorts of distractions. I mean,
Yeah.
Bullhead City, Arizona,
Yeah.
you're flying over a thermal energy plant on short
Yeah.
final. Talk about an issue. I mean, that is generating a thermal on short final there. That is a crazy deal. You fly into San Carlos, which I know
Yeah.
I mean, talk about insanity.
Yeah, you've got a cement plant, you've got all
You
kinds
got a
of stuff.
cement plant, you got high-tension power lines, you have fencing and jogging trails within 100 feet of the end of the runway. And on one end, runway 1, 2, you have a giant fence, probably 40 feet from the runway threshold. This is not an end-of-the-world deal.
Right.
The rock removal, I don't care if you put AstroTurf out there with, 2 feet of foam underneath it. You ain't going to solve a problem of an aircraft crashing out there. It's still a 3-to-1 grade. That's the issue.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've been into, Sedona, you're on a hill, and it's an inclined runway. It's not a flat runway. It's got like a 3-degree incline to it, so you can only land in one direction, even if you've got a tailwind. It's crazy. But those are things that are dictated by that geography. And I think Mr. Leitch's point is this is something that might be in our control. It certainly was in our control. Before the runway project was done, before we had the hill removed, we didn't have as much of an issue. It was a flatter kind of meadow area you could land in. But then we got rid of 1 million cubic yards of that hill, which did cause somewhat squirrely winds when you were landing right at the approach end.
Oh, yeah.
We got rid of that hill, and back then the engineering advice was scatter the rock into this area, but don't bury it because we'll be able to utilize it for the road construction when they were building the freeway through. Well, then the contractor who got the road construction didn't want the rock, and so now we've got all this scattered rock. And now the other thing is, when we built the runway used to have a hump in the middle. It dropped off in that direction. And so to do correct engineering for runway, we made it level, which meant we brought up the east end, which made that hill higher. So even if you didn't have that rock there, you would still have that elevated hill. You'd still have maybe not a cliff, but a bluff of some sort that you would be approached if there were no rock. And so I'm not trying to make an excuse for the situation. I'm just trying to give you some context of kind of, here's how we kind of got here. And I'm all for trying to come up with a way, if there is a way, for the removal to take place that would enhance the ability of an airplane to survive. I don't know if it's realistic or possible, but I think that's the value that I see in Mr. Leitch's comment, which is, geez, if there's something you can do about this to improve it, you should be doing it. But I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I don't see a way to improve it. I'm sorry. I don't see a way to improve that no matter what, just because of all the underlying factors you point out. You're going to hit rock or you're going to hit dirt. You're still going to hit a grade, a pretty steep grade. I don't know. I'm on the fence on this at this juncture. I think it would be important for those who are unfamiliar with this on this airport authority to physically look at it. But I don't, what are you going to do? It's going to be out there for years.
Well, a smoother surface might give you a chance. I mean, if you lose an engine on takeoff and you land straight ahead, leave your gear up, you may survive that because you'll be landing in the sagebrush up an incline. I mean, I always think that I would, but survive it, but I don't know. But if there were rocks scattered all over the place, you probably wouldn't. And so I think that's kind of where the distinction and the difference is. Yeah, it may be too steep a hill to survive it, but with the rocks there, you definitely won't. If the rocks were removed and it was graded smooth, I don't know, maybe you stall it right as you hit that surface and it's enough to survive. I just don't know.
Mr. Leach.
Thank you. A fundamental problem we have is been hinted at by some of the questions, and that is that there's a fundamental piece that's missing in the contract. The contract has a specification which unfortunately simply says a 3-to-1 slope, which is stupid, and it permits 4-inch rocks protruding from that surface, which is foolish. It doesn't have to be specified that way. There's lots of room out there to have a more gentle slope. Still a slope, but more gentle. But we have the specification and we have the pricing. What we don't have in the contract, unfortunately, is what you're getting at, and that is a way to negotiate with, agree with, compel whoever is doing the rock removal operation, the rock harvest operation, to do it in a way which prioritizes safety. That's missing. That's what you can negotiate now. It's far more important than the royalty.
Thank you.
Let me
Mr. Takis.
Yeah, I just want to correct one thing, is there was a grading plan that was approved before excavation began. And that grading plan included, I remember seeing it, I don't have it here, but that slope picture of what it was supposed to look like when they're done. And so when they approved when the airport, your predecessors on the airport authority approved this, they had an idea of what they were looking at. But we
Do you recall my objections to it?
Yeah, you probably did. I don't remember, Eric, but
Again, yes, indeed, it was done. But again, we have the opportunity to rethink it. We're not locked into what was done back then. You have the opportunity now to look at that and say, now with today's knowledge, is this the way to operate this for the benefit of the airport? You've got the opportunity to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Harris, did you have another comment? And then I think that'll be our wrap-up question.
Okay, I have a comment, and it is, I'm really uncomfortable in that I'm hearing that it's a dangerous situation and there's nothing we can do about it. And I'm also hearing, well, we need to do something about it. My point is, I can appreciate the fact that this falls within the rules of the FAA. At the same time, I'm not an aeronautics guy. I am a safety guy. I've worked in safety for 25 years or more, and it kind of falls under that. And while I know that the OSHA general industry rules have all kinds of specs in there that say you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this, it also has in the preamble a very clear description of another duty that employers have, and that is the general duty to have a safe workplace. And if you mess up, you can get written up under the general duty clause. I feel like we've had the general duty cold fish thrown in our face tonight, and we need to look at this. And I can appreciate that, people don't survive crashes into boulders, and they don't survive crashes into 1 to 3 slopes and those kinds of things. But I'm going to say right now, I am not comfortable voting yes. All right? I want to be very clear. If this comes up and we say we need to do this now, I can't vote for it.
Mr. Moen.
Cinder Light's also obligated under the Mine Safety Act in that operation, and they get inspected by the Mine Safety Bureau as well. So this is not like this is a haphazard. I'm not going to tell the board today that, hey, you got to vote on this and do X, Y, Z, but what I will comment on is that we're not doing anything that is unsafe. That operation on that field, that quarry, does not in and of itself present an unsafe issue. that is probably the salient point in this, is that we're in compliance. The Mine Bureau monitors the activity in the quarry. If we want to put big pillows out there at the end of the runway, and that's our object, I'm being tongue-in-cheek here. The point is that there is a pilot obligation in flying in and out of any airport, whether it's this airport or one sit on the bluff overlooking the Grand Canyon. There are always those obligations that pilots need to take into account, those factors that impact the operation.
Mr. Golden.
Ken, I think the bigger issue in summation here is it's not what's going on out there being safe, unsafe. I disagree that I think you're correct. What's going on a day-to-day basis is just fine. You know what bothers people about this? It's the change. That's what it is. If you looked at this picture back in 2007 when the runway 2011 when the runway was built, and then you look at that picture now, it's a very different picture. Is it materially more dangerous? No. Okay, it just isn't. But it changes, and I notice it. It changes from day to day, that's all. And I think that people are troubled with change. They see a different picture when they fly in. And for those, visitors of ours who only fly in during the winter or only fly in during the summer, the next time they fly in, it'll be a dramatically different picture. It's all it is. The hazard is going to be there no matter what.
And that hazard exists for other factors of the airport today.
Absolutely.
The lack of a nighttime approach is a perfect example of a hazard that exists on the airport that has been known about for a long time, and how do we correct that? And these are all similar issues, and I'm happy to take direction from the board on how you'd like me to proceed with that.
Mr. Takis, on the handout that Mr. Leach just handed out, could you comment on item 8 of the one that is a single page that talks about the performance bond? Does Cinderlight have a performance bond required under their current contract?
I think they do, but I'm looking right now. Actually, I'm not seeing it in the original contract. I'm seeing insurance requirements, but I was pretty sure there was one, and I'm not seeing it in the contract right now. And of course, I'm not looking at a signed version of the contract because I didn't have a signed contract on here, but I'm looking at what I believe was the final draft. And I guess the answer to your question is I don't see the requirement of posting a bond in here.
Okay. With the comments that have been had today, I would suggest perhaps that we table this until the next meeting, and that Mr. Moen and I meet again with Cinderlight to see if this can be modified in a way that will bring some cohesive application of what we've been talking about tonight as far as a landing area that is off the end of the runway, not necessarily the entire quarry area, but at least a straightaway part of it, to see if that can be mitigated over the next period of time, so that they have a plan to make it a little bit more palatable. Any other comments?
Yeah, I have one more, and that is...
Mr. Barrett.
That is that when you meet with Cinderlight, just a suggestion, if this takes an extended amount of time to get to the extension contract, which is what we're discussing, they would benefit by having a lower rate. So they might have an incentive to talk about this until we get there. And despite our manager's view, which I don't dispute, but I don't understand fully, which is probably my fault, it seems to me that there is a negotiation possible in an extended discussion with them about, well, if you have to do more, perhaps we can find some middle ground between this 10% increase and et cetera. I'm all for getting more money, but at the same time, I'm also for safety. What I'm hearing from a couple of the pilots and people who are aeronautic people here is, well, it won't make it completely safe, but it might make it a little safer. I don't understand these things, but I do understand negotiations. So I think it's in Cinder Light's interest, but we can't ask them tonight, they're not here. So that's just a suggestion that you could hold that carrot out, that if we go past November 15th, and they would continue with us doing it, despite the fact that that's a contract. In labor negotiations, people go on working and people go on negotiating and people go on getting paid under the previous. I don't know if that can be done here.
Well, that would require an evergreen clause in the initial contract. I'm sorry, that would require some sort of evergreen clause in the initial contract, but what I was going to suggest is perhaps what we do is we make a motion for a 30-day extension of the agreement so we don't run up into anything, because technically if the contract expires on November 15th, they should cease work. But my suggestion would be that we do 30-day reoccurring agreements until we get to some sort of a resolution that the board's comfortable with.
The other thing that we might suggest is moving our meeting night 1 week forward so that it's on the 14th of November, and that would keep us from having our meeting the night before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, that was going to be my suggestion later in the meeting.
You guys are really smart.
I was on it.
Yeah. That being said, I would entertain a motion to do a 30-day extension provision, vote on a 30-day extension provision with the idea that we will hear this again on, change our date, our meeting date to the 14th.
Can I suggest that?
Go ahead.
If there anything that we don't resolve in that 30-day period, that the contract continue on a 30-day basis, but not into perpetuity, but with the idea that we're going to work towards a.
How about, I'll move that we, I'm sorry. Linda, I'll move that we extend Cinder Light's contract on a month-to-month basis until such time as, we resolve long-term issues.
But I suggest that we include the royalty increase in
That's
that
fine.
30-day
No, let me
month-to-month.
revise.
Yes. Yeah.
Let me revise my motion.
I don't know that I'm comfortable with that, because then you take away the leverage that
Oh, no.
the negotiator would have.
No. I'm going to revise my motion and move that we increase the royalty to Cinder Light as proposed, and on a month-to-month basis.
And that we hold our meeting
Well,
one week earlier?
that's a different issue.
Okay,
We got to
all
hold
right.
the meeting 1 week earlier.
Can't do that because it's not agendized.
What's not agendized?
The meeting date.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, you can't vote on the meeting date, but the chairman can certainly set a different meeting date.
Okay,
I
then
mean,
we'll back that off from
And-
inclusion.
And you can request whether people are going to be available for
Right.
that date. That's not a violation of the meeting law, but yeah. But I tend to agree with what's being said. Don't make those two separate items. The meeting date should be a
Yeah,
separate.
Yes.
totally a different
Yeah.
issue.
Okay.
And should we give ourselves some pressure to complete the negotiations by setting like a sunset on how many 1 month long contracts we're going to authorize? Ken, maybe say three or six, something.
Three's nice.
Yeah, three. I like three personally. So up to 3 1 month extensions
Well,
to
just,
work out.
I would like to remind the board that we're entering the holiday season.
Yes.
This is going to be very difficult with November, December, January. You're going to have a hard time getting anything hard and fast in that period. So we have the power in the month-to-month suspension at any board meeting to cancel it.
Yeah, my motion stands. We can pull that agreement. That's why I said month to month. My motion stands. We can pull the agreement at any given time if it's month to month and say sayonara. That said, the landscape out there isn't going to change on the snap of a finger or the signature of a piece of paper.
Now,
It's-
what we would end up probably doing, I'm just looking at my crystal ball a little bit, would be that if we were to cancel the agreement, we'd ask them to rehabilitate the slope as per the original contract.
And that- and that will-
and then everybody would walk away, right?
That'll take a long time.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't, I'll get my semi-stupidity shield out here and say I don't understand the motion. Revisit it in this part about the royalty.
Okay, let me restate the motion. I'll move that we extend Cinder Light's contract on a month-to-month basis at the royalty that was negotiated between our airport manager and Chairman Law and Cinder Light. I believe it was $1.48 per ton, or was it $1.42?
$1.67.
Currently, it's $1.52, and we're increasing it to $1.67.
Okay, well, let me clarify my motion then. I so move that we extend Cinder Light's contract with Carson City Airport Authority on a month-to-month basis at $1.67 per ton of rock mined.
Any other comments?
I need a second.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Mr. Harris is seconded. Any discussion on the motion?
I don't think I can support this motion because I don't like the change in the royalty part.
I think the change in the royalty gives us some negotiating power back to what it may have been to begin with to get those concessions. That's what gives us the ability to talk to them about changing whatever,
Any potential?
yeah, any potential revision to
We
what they
increase the royalty.
plan on doing with their operations. I think that gives us a back down position that we don't have if we don't do it if we don't agree to that increase.
Okay.
Any other comments?
I'll defer to your wisdom.
I'd like to hear from Member Bear why he thinks it would be a negative to increase the royalty.
When negotiations are open, all negotiations are open. I don't think once you do these things that I think you're closing off an avenue, that's all.
Understood.
I mean, when you're negotiating, you're negotiating
Hold
everything, or we go back to this one thing, other thing. You go back to 2 tracks, even though it's one contract.
Madam Secretary?
Oh, no, I was fine. He didn't have his microphone.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, I have Mr. Golden's motion. I have a second to the motion. Any further discussion on the motion? Any other comment? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye.
I will say aye, deferring to the wisdom of the chairperson and the mover.
Larry, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? None heard? Motion carried. Thank you. Mr. Takis, shall I ask at this point in time, or shall I wait till the end of the meeting to change our meeting date to the 14th?
Well, I mean, you get to pick the meeting date. What you might want to do is just check, and you can do that in this public meeting, as to whether people would be available for the 14th. So if you want to just ask the other members if they'd be available, this is fine.
Do I have any member that is unable to attend a meeting on the 14th, which would be the Wednesday?
It won't take me a moment.
Okay. Not the immediate Wednesday before Thanksgiving, but that previous week. Wednesday before Thanksgiving is just a little difficult for some people to make. I'm not even altogether sure I'll be here in town.
Yeah, it would be-
14th,
That would
okay
be
with
the second Wednesday of the month versus the
Second
third.
Wednesday.
Correct.
you? Versus the 3rd, correct.
And
Miss-
while I'm waiting
Madam
for
Chair,
We may have to meet at another time or in another room because the RTC has a meeting that day.
We can still check the calendar and see where that's possible.
I can do that for you.
Okay, thank you.
You
Mr.
can also
Golden?
meet at the airport.
Right. Mr. Golden?
I'm available.
Mr. Rogers?
Available.
Larry, are you available on the 14th rather than the 21st?
No, I will be in Washington, D.C. that day coming back.
Okay. And Mr. Barrett, is the 14th okay with you?
I'll find out in a minute.
Oh, okay. It is okay with me.
Do we know the time?
Not yet. I would assume it will be any...
14's open.
14th's open for you? Okay, I would move that we...
You don't need to make a
Don't need to?
motion. You can just say that you're going to schedule it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let the record reflect we will meet on the 14th rather than the 21st.
Time to be determined.
Time to be time and place to be determined. Correct. Okay. Moving on to item G3, for possible action, Carson City Airport Authority to consider approval of airport architectural engineering and planning services contracts. Mr. Moen.
Thank you, Chair Law. I think we're not asking to approve any of the agreements at this point in time. A couple things are going on right now, is we've exchanged proposals for the professional service agreement with both Kaufman Associates for airport planning and with Armstrong Associates for airport engineering. We have, Mr. Takis and I have had exchanged discussions about those agreements, and we believe that the Kaufman original proposal looks much more in line with the provisions and the detail in the agreement. We've made the similar proposals to Armstrong. They're reviewing it at this point in time. What we'd like to ask the board is to allow us to continue negotiations at this point. We don't really have the ability to do the independent fee study until we finish the professional service agreement detail, and then we have to have a scope of work that we can submit to outside parties to submit their comparable fee structure. So all we're asking for is a continuation to allow us to figure the detail out. We can add it to either the 14th or next December. We're not in immediate need of either of those services. As you know, Kaufman is under contract with Atkins for the master plan. Atkins is on a month-to-month retainer at this point in time under the agreement that they're currently operating under. They're also doing the construction management on our taxiway rehab project, and I'll discuss that later on my manager's report. So basically what we're looking for from the board at this point in time is allow us just a continuance.
Does anybody have any objection to directing the manager to continue on this item and report back to us at a six-seating meeting? None seen? You are authorized to do so. Moving on to the next item, G4, for discussion and possible action to approve lean engineering nighttime operation feasibility study. Mr. Moen.
As the board's aware that we had this discussion at the last meeting, and we submitted a proposal from Lean Engineering to conduct a study of an instrument approach to alleviate the nighttime restriction to our airport. One of the questions that came out of the last, I actually had two IOUs from the board, one from Member Rogers, which was about the ROI on what the instrument approach would provide the airport. I don't have any further data on that. I haven't been able to really to analyze that any further. I think we're going to need some assistance in trying to analyze an ROI. And then the other question is how we were going to pay for it. And the question being whether that is grant eligible. And from my discussions with Lean Engineering, it may be grant eligible retroactively. The board would, the airport authority would have to invest in conducting the study. The FAA is currently proposing a new approach, RNAV approach for the airport. That was probably instigated by some of the earlier requests from other operators about an approach, but the minima don't really change enough to think we're going to get some sort of it's still going to have a nighttime restriction. So as I mentioned, there was 5 tasks in that Lean Engineering proposal, of which basically the first 2 or 3 had to be accomplished prior to us having any real knowledge of what the outcome was going to be. So that was an investment of around $30,000 to get to that point. The last 2 tasks were obviously, if that approach now looks feasible, they would flight check it, and then they would do the public outreach on that. And those were the final 2 tasks. In our conversation with Lean, that was the approach that we were suggesting that we take. We we get those first two items or the first three tasks completed so that we know where we're really at. But if you looked at our, as you get a chance over the next 30 days or so to review the draft of the economic impact study, and also look, as we're looking at our master plan, this is all going to dovetail together with our master plan and our discussion that we're going to have here in a couple of minutes on developing a strategic plan. So this lean engineering agreement does not need to be acted on at this juncture, but as the board to understand, I think one of the bigger safety issues to our airport is not having a night approach. And even in VFR weather, there's no course guidance that somebody has to come into the airport at night. They can track the approach, but technically they're not going to get a clearance for it. And so it's still going to be based upon visual line of sight, picking the airport up, being able to complete their landing. But as part of our future development, the master plan is going to, if we decide to go this way, in a discussion with Kaufman, is that we kind of slow roll this, allow lean to get into the process and get an idea of how that would impact our master plan going forward. Paul Hanna from Lean Engineering made a site visit to the airport about a week and a half ago, and he got a good look at what the area looks like standing at the approach enter runway 27, looking out to the east. And it's going to be some sort of lighting enhancement to the airport. A lighting enhancement is grant eligible. And so when we complete our master plan, that kind of stuff would be dovetailed into the master plan. So we don't want to hurry up, get the master plan done, and then try to incorporate the study. So this study really has to go in front of the completion of the master plan, because we want it in our airport layout plan, otherwise it will not be grant eligible, and we do want it as our final determination on how the airport infrastructure is going to look. Bringing on the new engineering firm, they're going to obviously we're going to want them involved in this. So this is something that's probably, again, going to be punted till probably after the first of the year. But I think that's okay. I don't think we're in a big hurry to knock that out and miss these key elements as we go forward. So what I'd like to do is to be able to come back once we've completed the professional service agreements, get Armstrong involved. Kaufman will certainly be involved as part of this, and then we'll have to make a determination as an organization if we want to fund this up front. We have the funds available to allocate towards this, and I think that's something as a organization we're going to decide whether that's a good priority for us. But to me, that is a higher safety issue than the quarry that we had spent a lot of time talking about.
One of the things I would ask you is, considering the fact that we've been notified over the last week or so about the potential for a wind farm adjacent to the northeast area of the airport, how do you see that affecting what we're looking at down the road as far as this night approach is concerned?
That was also part of my manager's report. I'll touch on that briefly, unless you want me to go in a little bit more deeper discussion of that wind farm at this time.
No, we can cover it during your, but I just think
It is
that
an impact.
I think it will
Yes.
have an impact
Yes.
on that, and I think that we need to keep that in mind.
Yes. So with your
Okay.
permission, can we carry this forward? It'll probably not get real serious consideration until after the first of the year.
Does anyone have any objection or comment, Mr. Golden?
Obviously, I was absent in the last meeting, but I do want to address some of the topics you were touched on and a question that came up. As for return on investment, exponential. Exponential to an incredible degree. There are multiple aircraft operators that will not come into Carson City Airport because of not having the ability to fly that approach, even in perfect conditions at night. They can't get a clearance in, and their insurance requires them to get an insurance in. Keep in mind, during the winter months, it's dark at 4:30, 4:45. It's pitch black at 5 o'clock. We've had so many requests for this. And one of the things that we can do as an airport, the FAA has a website that you can go to as a pilot and you can request a WAS approach on that website. If we got every single tenant at this airport to go onto that website and put that request in, it would be huge. Now, that said, a couple of other very brief comments. You talked about grant funding for this, and I don't know if this has been investigated. Again, pardon me, I wasn't here for the last meeting. Perhaps NDOT might fund that grant? I mean, heck, they're using the airport. They have funds, through their aeronautical division. This is an important issue. It is the state capital. We should have an approach that doesn't limit aircraft at nighttime hours from flying in here.
I absolutely agree with that, and there are several stakeholders that would be involved in this. Obviously, NDOT is one of them. But I think one thing that will speak very loudly to the aviation community is if the board takes the lead on this. Don't walk around handout going, hey, give us some bucks to do this study. I think we can get people to dovetail onto our and follow the airport authority. But I think we need to be the leader on that and be committed toward that. If we're saying broadly as part of our strategic plan and our airport master plan that this is a safety issue and something that we want to take the time and effort to improve, then we need to be the leader. And I believe that those other entities will come on board. There's other issues with NDOT that we need to discuss as far as the relationship to our airport, but those aren't necessarily factors in this particular discussion. But the FAA, as far as the WAS approach is concerned, I did have extensive discussions with FAA flight standards prior to approaching lean, and they're not going to initiate that. We got to show the safety justification, and that's what lean does. Lean actually gets this approach designed, and they submit it to the FAA for flight check. And when the FAA sees that they've got a real time viable approach, they take it over.
Yeah. One last comment for you. Myself and Mark Gibbs, Mark, he's the airport manager.
Yes.
A former airport manager in Elko. He and I were recently involved in a major battle with the FAA's division that handles these approaches, because the FAA right now is eliminating approaches all around the country. You may or may not be aware of that.
You're talking about nav aids like VORs and things like that.
It's beyond nav aids and VORs, okay? They were eliminating an approach into Tahoe itself that they made it so that you couldn't fly in at night, and there was no circling to land allowed east of the airport, which makes perfect sense considering the terrain. And then they were limiting the approach to categories A and B aircraft only. Well, Mark and I, more so myself than Mark, had to literally get our congressional representatives involved to force the FAA to change their opinion on the matter, because they were trying to eliminate the only GPS-based approach into that airport, which would have left one approach left, which was an LDA DME, and most aircraft today don't even have DME on board any longer. So the FAA has been, I'm not trying to take the wind out of your sails, I'm just saying it's going to take a Herculean effort. The FAA has been in the process of literally eliminating thousands of approaches around the nation because they feel that it's additional work and additional cost for them. When they were told they had to flight check the Tahoe approach and there's a cost to doing that, they just went off the rails and they said, the heck with it, we'll just approve it instead of flight checking it. So there's an issue going on there in that division of the FAA, and this is not the first one that I've heard of either. It's all around the country, and so it'll take a mass effort, but it's not to say it's not insurmountable. And one of the things we'll want to do is get our congressional representative on board, our senator, United States senator, and the governor, state itself on board to pressure the FAA to do this, and they will do it. They just don't want to do it because it takes effort on their end.
Well, and that's why we need to be the leader on that.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Mr. Rogers, go ahead.
I wholeheartly agree with Mr. Moen that we need to lead. I mean, if there's one thing that I've heard from virtually all the stakeholders in my short time on the Airport Authority is that everybody agrees this is a good idea for the Carson City Airport and that it's an economic driver. And I think that if we're going to ever do something that's speculative, spend money on a speculative basis, this is it.
Just to add on, I mean, it's the ROI and the safety. I mean, we get both from this, and that's if we're going to take a risk, let's take it on this project.
And finally, I want to say that Mr. Moen is right. We need to take the lead, and Mr. Golden is right. It's an exponential opportunity, so we'll take the $30,000 risk or more if that's necessary, I think. I don't say how I'll vote in the future, but I think.
All right. With that comment, I would be willing to entertain a motion to go forward with lead engineering doing the first 3 phases, if there is an appetite to do that at this time.
I'd like to, as much as I'd like to have that vote tonight, I'd like to push this just a little bit further in the future, that we can bring in our new partners in, with Armstrong on this, as well as refine this a little bit with lean and talk a little bit more to our stakeholders. I'm all about leading. I mean, if you gave me direction today to sign an agreement and get going, I would do that. I don't think there's immediate rush in the next 2 weeks is going to change anything, but I would like to give us another period here to evaluate this a little bit further, just to get make sure we're heading in the right direction with a couple of these other issues going forward.
Well, the other thing is it gives us a little bit more time to do research on the wind farm, and I think that's probably a good idea. So I would direct you to transfer this to the November agenda, and we will revisit it at that time without objection from the members. Okay? All right, moving on to item G5 for discussion and possible action to approve formation of a strategic planning committee. Mr. Moen.
Thank you. Yesterday, Member Harris and Member Rogers and I had lunch with one Linda Ritter. You may recognize her as the former city manager for Carson City as well as Elko. A unique thing about Mrs. Ritter is that she also was the de facto airport manager at Elko in her tenure as city manager. So she has a very good understanding of airports. We met with her to discuss her facilitating a strategic plan for the Carson City Airport. She has been instrumental in doing strategic plans for the Carson City Visitors Bureau as well as Western Nevada Community College. So she's well-versed in this type of work. And I believe that Member Harris and Member Rogers and myself are all in the same mindset that in order to do this properly, we need a facilitator as opposed to trying to do it internally. That helps, one, keep us on track. Two, it helps broaden the scope of work a little bit and divide the workload. If we were to do this internally, basically, that would really fall in my lap. And I don't know if that would allow for an unbiased approach with the group, other stakeholders. The stakeholders in the strategic plan would include NDOT, would include the city, and would include, of course, tenants and various operators. And so I think the way to do this correctly and is to have a person of her caliber. What I've asked her to do, based upon our meeting yesterday, is to kind of develop a scope of work for us to review, and then be able to, once we get a handle on what that looks like and the division of labor, so to speak, that we can ask her to submit a proposal to the board for approval. This is something that I think would begin also after the first of the year, and that based upon our discussion, I believe something we could do within a relatively short time frame. And I say that time frame looks like under 6 months. I've seen strategic plans for other organizations that take a lot longer than that to develop, but I think with a group our size, we should be able to be a little bit more expeditious in that. But I think we'll end up with a better product. The biggest thing that we've indicated to her in our conversation is that we wanted some sort of performance metrics out of that strategic plan, that this just wouldn't be something that we could pat ourselves on the back that, oh, look, we did a strategic plan, and then it resides on a shelf somewhere. We want this to be a real working model. And as you can see in a lot of these discussions, we're kind of reacting to issues as they arise, as opposed to having a planned approach to our method. And so I think this is really critical, and I believe the board's already indicated that they're all behind this process. I think now it's just a matter of finding the right person to do this. I do have another person I'm very familiar with out of Reno. Her name's Erica Olson, but I believe that Ms. Ritter's experience both in the Carson City area is really critical to helping us with that. Her knowledge of the community and people and the players in the community would be a great advantage to us. Ms. Olson did do the strategic plan for the Reno Tahoe Airport Authority, so she does have some airport experience. She's not as familiar with the community, I believe, and I think Linda Ritter at this point in time, I'd like to get permission to the board to get a proposal from her and be able to advance that to you sometime before the end of the year.
Do you see this as a committee that is going to be subject to the open meeting law and have public notice of their actions? Because if they're coming back to us with a plan, that's generally how that happens.
That would be if the group was making decisions for the airport and would be comprised of members of the airport authority. Obviously, I would be a staff representative to this committee. And then the other parties, I don't know if we may have one board member on it as part of the group. I think Mr. Takis could help guide us in this process.
Mr. Takis, do you have comments on this as to the structure and the operations?
Yeah, I think that I would want to see the makeup so I could figure out how it fits into the open meeting law. But I agree with what Ken just said. I'm happy to help guide it through that process. Clearly, we don't want to have a problem with the open meeting law. And if that created some kind of limitation, of course, I'd bring that back to you so you could decide how you wanted to change things if you did. You know, just to project ahead, either we find a solution that fits the open meeting law, we just jump ahead, or we run into a roadblock, then it's going to come back to you and we're going to say, okay, look, should this part of the meeting be in a public meeting, in one of our airport authority meetings, and some other functions be someplace else?
Mr. Harris.
Just to comment, I think a more open process is just fine in this. I mean, if it means that we're having a public meeting to discuss this in steps, I think that'd be all right. We spoke a little bit with Linda Ritter regarding this, and there are ways to collect information without board members even being involved in terms of the stakeholders and that sort of thing, and then bringing that back to the authority and, you know, and be agendized. So, I mean, I'm okay with a really open approach to this.
Mr. Rogers.
A couple of comments. One is the Visitors Bureau would be a stakeholder also. And we did have a significant discussion with Linda Ritter about open meeting laws, and I think it's actually quite a good notch or a good item on her resume that she has worked in the open meeting law environment her whole career. So she's very familiar with it. And what she described briefly to us was a process where she would go out and canvass the stakeholders and then bring back the information from the stakeholders. Hey, here's what your constituents want, based on the work that I've done. What part, and bring that whole body of work back to the board, and then ask the board to choose amongst those priorities that are set by the various stakeholders and then instruct staff, we want you to take these elements of what's been brought to us and incorporate that into a strategic plan and bring it back to us. That was her general thoughts. And I thought that that made a lot of sense to me from an open meeting law standpoint, and wide open, of course, for Mr. Takis to express his opinion on that.
Yes.
Go ahead, sir.
All I'll say is yes, those are all good ideas, and I think that can work.
Mr. Barrett.
A couple of questions. In your discussions, the three of you with Ms. Ritter, who I know and agree with you about, did she talk about, obviously you're going to seek a proposal, and so you probably didn't get too deep into this, but did she give any estimates of costs or whatever?
We didn't discuss that at all. I think we really need to figure out the scope of work first and then be able to go back
I know
and
she
figure
works
that.
as a consultant, so there would be a cost. It's an investment. I'm not balking at it. I just wondered. Secondly, did you share with her the Harris information that you got, or was that after the fact?
No, I did inform her that we have a draft report, and that would certainly be part of our working group, would be utilizing that information from that. And I thought that was critical to this whole process. That's why I initiated that with Professor Harris early on in my tenure.
Thank you.
Just get ahead of that.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Any public comment on this item? I would entertain a motion that we approve the formation of a strategic planning fact-finding group, and that it be reported back to the authority at the November meeting. Do I have a motion?
Is there any, thought of membership in this fact-finding group, or?
I think that that's probably what I'm asking for him to do, is to create whatever that group would be, and then submit it back to us for approval, rather than us try to designate those people at tonight's meeting to go forward.
I think we have suggestions on what some of those stakeholders might look like, and all additions could be made now. But I think the biggest thing now is to get a scope of work designed and then be able to come back with some sort of proposal for the board. And during that process, we should be able to identify who those stakeholders will be.
And confirm.
And I see a public workshop certainly in the making to try to get input from the general public as well, because they're all impacted by the airport and the community.
They just don't know it.
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Mr. Rogers.
I think the correct motion at this point in time is to authorize staff to work with Linda Ritter and to create a proposal to have her manage a strategic planning process.
Friendly amendment, her and our manager.
Yes. I saw.
Would you like to restate your motion based on the amendment?
Okay, I'd like to move that we authorize staff to work with Mrs. Ritter to develop a proposal to the board for the creation of a strategic planning committee.
Do I have a second?
I second.
I have a motion by Mr. Rogers and a second by Mr. Harris for the formation, for our manager to work with Ms. Ritter to come back with a proposal for a strategic planning process for the airport's authority, the airport's review. Any discussion on that motion? Any public comment again? None heard. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Larry, did you hear that?
Aye.
Thank you.
I did, aye.
Okay. Any opposed? None heard. Motion carries. All right, moving on. The airport engineer's report was submitted by Atkins and was included in your packets. Do you want to cover that briefly, Mr. Moen?
I'd be happy to. The first item was regarding the master plan, and this is a result of our discussion with Atkins, who is, subcontracted with Kaufman Associates to do the master plan, and it basically lays out what stages we're currently in, which is we're trying to come up with the final development proposals for the plan and the airport layout plan. And as I said, we're going to kind of throttle back just a little bit with Kaufman at this point till we get the lean engineering piece completed. They're all in favor of that. They know of lean engineering by work and reputation and think this is a great thing for the airport authority. The second piece is we did initiate the taxiway rehab project. It's not going quite like I wanted it to go, which is that I thought we'd get it completed this year. We did a walkthrough inspection of both taxiways Alpha and Delta, full length and width, and did some follow-up work as we're going along. Most of that work was done at night. And so once the sunlight came out, you could see some flaws in some areas or areas that needed some extra material. They've actually used more material than was spec'd. They've ordered 3 additional pallets of crack seal that they're going to put down next week. It should be, I have a follow-up call with them on Friday to ensure that the material's on site, and then I'll put out a tenant bulletin for the additional work. It's all going to be daytime work, and the work is going to primarily focus on taxiways Bravo, Charlie, and then taxi lanes Echo and Foxtrot, as well as that piece of the perimeter road up by Gate 4 on the north end. And then we're going to postpone the fog seal and the saw cut hot patch on Bravo. The fog seal's for the entire taxiway project, but the saw cut, there's like a 400-foot area that they're going to cut and then hot patch, and that's going to be postponed till the spring. Now, I've asked them to put us on their calendar because I didn't want this to be a nebulous time that they suddenly said, oh, gee, we're really busy, we can't get back to you. So our project start date is May 6th, obviously weather dependent. Their concern was that the temperatures, when they were originally discussing this, are obviously trying to gauge the forecast. And as they discovered, forecasting weather is really hard. And so, based on that, the temperatures aren't where they want them to be, and they're afraid that we're going to end up with a mess. They put it down, it doesn't cure properly, tenants use it. It doesn't, they have an issue they call cornrowing, where the material is really heavy and thick and it comes out of the sprayer and doesn't spread as it should. So on all that, with all that information in light, I urge them to complete the crack seal during this period, and then those 2 items, or 3 items, I guess it would be the fog seal, the saw cut, and then the striping would all be done in the spring. The crack seal didn't impact the navigational of the striping on the airport. There's some areas obviously where the lines are covered up, but they're obvious, they're small areas, and I don't believe that'll pose an issue. So I wanted to inform the board that we should have the crack seal done this year and then the fog seal done at a later time. They did also confirm the price will remain the same. There'll be if the material costs go up, they're going to eat that. So that concludes the engineer's report.
Any questions, Mr. Moen, on that item? Thank you. We will move forward to the airport manager's report.
I'll try not to be too long-winded on this, but just to begin, the September fuel flow numbers, we had 100 low lead. We sold 2,500 gallons of 100 low leads compared to August was 1,671. Jet A was 18,700 or so, and then last month it was 19,001. So a little bit of drop off in the Jet A, but the fuel flow for 100 low lead was increased. Now, I do want to talk about safety in this next item. Go ahead, Mike.
Can I correct you on that?
Please do, because I got this information from you, your account.
From our office.
Yes.
That's the full service number.
It's not total fuel flow.
It is not total, no.
Okay.
You can add another, I'm shooting from the hip, for September, probably about 14,000 gallons. And I sent...
For Jet A?
No, total. I don't have the breakdown.
Okay.
I can get that for you. But I send you a report every month
with the jet.
That's total numbers, and then I've gone back to Ian, and he's given me the breakdown for 100.
But that's for full serve.
Okay.
I give you a separate
Okay.
report that shows gallons, flow fee off the self-serve itself. It doesn't break out Jet A.
Right,
It just
right.
totals.
Okay.
I could break it out for you, but there's another 14,000 or so gallons from September. And actually, September was up over last year in September.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we could get those monthly,
Well, yeah,
that'd be a
and-
real help. I'm using, Michael, just for your information, I'm trying to use this as an indication of activity as opposed to the nebulous guess of how many airplanes are taken off.
Absolutely. And,
Yeah.
and you know, if you just requested of me each time I send that to you that you need the breakdown, I'll give it back. But could you repeat those numbers real quick?
I showed for 100 low lead, 2,503 gallons. And then for Jet A, 18,755.
So you got there about 23,000.
Yeah, 21 and some change.
21 and some change.
Yeah.
Add another 14 or so on top of that, so you got 35,000 gallons.
Yeah, that's impressive.
That's pretty healthy.
That's a good month, huh?
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm just saying
That's a
goes
good
on-
number, yeah.
Yeah, it goes on pretty much every
Right.
month. You're missing the self-serve, that's all I'm
Well,
pointing.
I didn't know that those numbers were separate, so
They're
I
totally
appreciate
separate.
that. Right.
Yeah.
but I do-
I'll clue you in offline, okay?
Okay, thank
All
you.
right.
To me, this is probably a bigger safety issue than anything we've talked about tonight. And on the 14th of October, we had a glass air land runway 9. Its gear collapsed, and it exited the runway at about the 2,000-foot marker, crossed Alpha 4, and came to rest on the east side of Alpha 3. It took out 2 taxi lights. And the way I discovered this was during my inspection of the taxiway project. I came across a broken taxiway light, came across some divots in the pavement as the airplane's fuselage ran across there, and went, somebody left the runway. And Title 19 requires that the airport manager be notified of an incident. When I spoke to the pilot, once I saw this, I called a couple of tenants and asked them if they knew anything about it. I said, oh, you found out about that? And I said, yes, I did. And I informed them that they're required by city municipal code to report that. And I did visit with FAA Inspector Don Morgan, who indicated due to the damage, it was no longer an incident, it was now an accident. So this is a critical piece, and I've observed this in my tenure here more than once, where it's the attitude of the operators on the field had been, let's hurry up and move this and pretend it didn't happen. And in my opinion, that is a grave disservice. And I'll tell you, the reason this jumps out at me is FOD on the runway and the taxiway. There was FOD, both taxiways, rock and other dirt and other items on the taxiway. And during our inspection with Don Morgan, we were looking for a bolt and a nut that came off the gear. So we were unable to locate it, but those kind of items, it just takes one ingestion into a jet engine on arrival or takeoff, and that's much more critical incident to us than some of the other issues that we talked about tonight. So I really have a big issue with this. So I went in and I made sure that the website does say that there's an emergency contact number. I will be posting an emergency contact number outside the doorway of the office, but tenants know how to get a hold of us. Because when they have an issue, they sure know how to find it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if I can express this in any more stern terms than that. This is an incredibly important issue for everybody that operates in and out of that airport. And I'm going to articulate that back to the tenants. Follow-up for last month, runway 9 Pappy was out of service. We found a faulty photo cell in that, and that was what caused the tilt switch to go out. So we've improved that. As you know, that Pappy cannot be used at night due to the angle of descent on that, so the photo cell turns it on and off. I've already talked about the crack seal. The snowplow is still with NDOT. I'm going to skip around on a couple items and then circle back to through the fence. Sierra Skyway has completed the slabs on their project for the first phase, so they'll probably be erecting in the next, after the cure period, probably 2-3 weeks. They'll start going vertical. The Arrowhead approach, I believe you guys have seen photos I've sent out. If not, I can resend them. I think they did an excellent job on that. City went out and looked at it today. They weren't aware that it was complete yet, and the street supervisor went, wow, that turned out really good. So the next piece on that is to get the signage up on the roadway. And that's basically for the benefit of the community driving up and down. Now we have the lumber yard that's just getting ready to open. They've been stockpiling material now on site. And then right down the road, we have, semi trucks leaving the quarry onto Arrowhead. So some signage alerting drivers on that would be very beneficial. I don't know if you noticed, but the Grumman has continued to get dismantled there on the northwest ramp.
Yeah.
I spoke with Dennis Buin just the other day, and he believes he has a buyer for the one that's out in the dirt. And so they're talking about making that yard art somewhere. So thank God it's not going to be in my front yard and one of my neighbor's front yards.
It's not in our city.
It might be something to do with Black Rock Desert. I'm not sure yet. We did repair the fence along Gonai Road, but we did have a new fence penetration off of College Parkway. We discovered a abandoned vehicle on our property and about 60 feet of fence damaged. We didn't have to erect a temporary, basically the car almost went underneath it, but it's got to be repaired, and that is underway. I've already filed the claim. And before I get through the fence, I did send out a notification regarding the FAA's conducting an aviation study regarding a potential wind farm. This wind farm is just north of our airport. And I'm talking about the hillside up by your house.
Mount Charleston.
Yeah.
No.
Not that one, but the other one. McClellan Peak.
McClellan Peak.
Yeah, and it's
Wrong spot.
I believe the height of these, this is just the structure itself, it does not include the blades, is 495 feet.
And that's huge.
And we're not talking about one turbine, we're talking about several, yes.
Right, a whole valley full.
And the FAA has already identified that that's going to impact our minimum for our circling approach as it stands now, as well as the Reno Tahoe Airport. It's going to impact both their departure procedures as well as their instrument approaches from the south.
I was told while I was down at the Minden Air Show that they tried to put that down in Douglas County and were turned down. So I don't know that that's absolutely true, but I do plan on contacting Bobby Thompson and see what their response was to it and see if we can follow that same path.
Well, I've sent this information to Reno Tahoe Airport just to ensure that they are aware of it and got a response back from their planning engineering department. I've sent it to all Silver Springs, I've sent it to Dayton Valley, I've sent it to the various groups on the airfield, EAA, CAP. I'm going to get it out to all the tenants. But the point of the matter is that we have to formulate a response by the 26th, which I intend to do. I did also send this to Kaufman Associates as well as notified Armstrong, and I did have a discussion with Lean Engineering about it as well. And Lean gave me some really good talking points on this. And so it's right in the wheelhouse that we need to jump on top of this. NDOT does have the information as well, and Kirk's going to also formulate a reply. But I think it behooves everybody to respond to it. One response won't be sufficient. I think it needs to be a plethora. We are operating under about a 9-day time frame, but
Is Washoe County the approving agency?
no, I don't think so. I think it's BLM land, and whether or not it goes through the city. I haven't circled back with the city yet on this piece because I don't know who's behind the project. So they've made a proposal to somebody, and I haven't got that finalized. So I'll continue to circulate that information.
A question.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Moen. What can we do What can members
Well, I
of the
think
board can do?
we have a response from the airport authority. It'll be a group response, but individuals can respond as well. And I think that as an airport authority member, you can send an email to expressing your concern about that project. And I think it's a big negative to the aviation community.
Do you have a link that,
Yes, I'll send that out.
send that out to the members so that we can?
I believe I sent it out last week.
I think you did.
Yeah, but I'll resend.
I'd have to
Yeah.
look.
So finally, and this is a big issue too, I was contacted by Supervisor Bonkowski representing a buyer for a 3-acre parcel of the 28 acres east of the taxiway Bravo. The buyer is a gentleman by the name of Wayne Chilton. He is currently a tenant on our airfield, and he's looking to build a hangar and store fuel on the property for his use. He did also ask about the ability to have a Part 135 operation out of there. Of course, I have not gotten back with him at this point. I told him I was going to conduct some research on this. There's some discussion about access points, but we're even into the point about looking at the older deeds and try to understand how the rights were transferred to future owners and if they're able to be transferred. And then also we have the issue if there is in fact through the fence access that what the access agreement looks like, where the access points are. So I did emphasize to them as part of our master plan, this is really critical for the airport to identify these points if in fact that there is through the fence access onto our property that is in the deed, and that it behooves both parties to identify points for that whole stretch. I informed them that we would prefer to own that property, and I have a conference call with the ADO tomorrow and FAA compliance. I sent the FAA an email, I believe I copied everybody on, and they came back to me saying, this is really a big issue and we need to bring compliance in on this, let's have a chat. So that's going to take place tomorrow afternoon. So there are a couple really hot topics that are on our airfield at this point in time, and I will keep you informed and engaged in those and let you know where we end up. But there is some more research that needs to be done before we even get any further on a discussion of an access point. But that concludes my report.
On that 28-acre parcel, you mentioned to me in a conversation we had offline that may qualify under that $1 billion that the FAA put out, or the Congress put out as far as aviation projects are concerned. Do you want to cover that a little bit?
Yes, I will. When the FAA informed the airport community that there was going to be a supplemental $1 billion fund available, it was going to rural airports. As you know, we were not identified as initial recipient in that. However, the Federal Register published a statement stating that airports that weren't on that list are eligible to respond to it in the month of October. So we have a short window to submit a response. And so I'm talking right now with our future consultant about putting together a response or an application for supplemental grant funding. And so this would be a task order outside of any agreement we have with them. It's a modest charge, it's like about $800, but that will get us into the pool. And if we're going to identify purchasing that property, we would like that application to reflect that. It is listed, when we met with the ADO at the Nevada Airports Association last spring, we identified that property as potential of application because of this type of use that's being described right now for through the fence access.
Thank you. Any questions on that item? If you could go forward with that and research it, that would be great. I think that is the perfect thing for us to do. If we could get a portion of that supplemental, that would be major for us. Do you have anything further on your manager's report?
I do not.
Thank you. Legal counsel's report, Mr. Takis.
I don't have anything additional.
Okay, moving forward, Larry, do you have anything on a treasurer's report for us?
Just wanted to thank Beth Cohn and Manager Moan for the audit results. a lot of work on that. Also, Manager Moen's making some changes. We had some problems. Numbers we weren't justifying correctly that he got corrected in the latest financial report. And things are looking strong in a good equity position. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. All right, moving on to item L, report from authority members. I would like to make a quick comment that the money that we took from our designated reserve fund and our prepaid lease fund that we put into the treasurer's office, I pulled the report up 3 days ago, and in the 2 months that it's been invested, we have over $2,100 in interest that's been added to those accounts. And it looks very promising for the future as far as interest rates are concerned, according to the treasurer's office. Secondarily, probably 4 months ago, I had a meeting with Jennifer Budge over at Parks and Recreation and Land Use for the city. And I talked to her because of the RV park that was going to be put over to the south of Arrowhead Road. I said it would be really nice if they would have moved that to the north side of the road, which is BLM city land that was gotten through a BLM exchange. And so she and I talked about it at length, and I was informed the other day that they believe that it's going to be on the Board of Supervisors. I think it's going to be on the Planning Commission agenda, but it appears that they've worked it out so that the property to the north, which was on an open land use, will be protected for overrun area for the airport. So I was very pleased to hear that. Even if the RV park goes in, which we hope it doesn't, but it could, it will give some place for departing traffic or approaching traffic to go if they have an engine out. And to me, that's really an important thing. So those two items are what was on my radar screen, and I thought I'd report back to you what I'd heard recently. So, any other reports from authority members?
No, I'd just like to say kudos on the first part of your report, and secondarily, I believe that was going to come to the board. The second part of your report on the land was going to come to the Board of Supervisors, but then it was pulled to send to planning and open space, I believe, so, which is part of Parks and Rec.
Right. Okay. Any communication correspondence or status reports from any of the authority members? Seeing none, any final public comment? None seen. Any agenda items for the next regular meeting other than those mentioned tonight? If you can contact the manager and ask him to put those on the agenda, that would be helpful. And if there is nothing further, we are adjourned.